The Florence Cathedral presented a unique set of problems. The original plan had called for a dome over the actual cross between the nave and the transept of the building. Now, that dome was about a third of the length of the nave, and it was about 149 feet in diameter. That would make the dome that was built there actually the largest dome in the world at the time. It had caused all kinds of problems because the architects actually had made a small model in the church, and the model itself had collapsed. The problem was that there was no external support for the dome. Normally, large domes, even the ceilings of churches, were constructed with outside supports called buttresses. Normally, you would have buttresses the whole way around the dome, so as the weight of the dome pressed outward, the dome would be supported by buttresses pressing back inward. The problem is, the designers, the people of Florence, didn't want buttresses. Those were old-fashioned. Florence was better than that. The problem was what they were proposing was impossible. Now, this dome had actually been built as a wooden dome, which then collapsed in a minor earthquake in the late 1300s. The new dome was commissioned. They went looking for an architect, and of course, the final commission for the dome came down to Ghiberti versus Brunelleschi. Brunelleschi won the commission, and as he began to build the dome, many people became nervous. They didn't believe that he could actually do this impossible task. Part of Brunelleschi's plan, his strategy for this dome, actually came from the time that he spent away from Rome, away from Florence rather. Back when he was pouting over Ghiberti getting the commission for the doors, Brunelleschi had taken a tour of Italy, and he'd actually spent some time south of Florence in the city of Rome. In the city of Rome was a structure surviving from ancient Rome. That structure was called the Pantheon. The Pantheon had been designed and built by an ancient Roman emperor named Hadrian, and Hadrian had had this structure built as a temple for himself. The structure had a dome about 142 feet across, not quite as big as the one planned for the Florence Cathedral, but still pretty darn close. The amazing thing about the Pantheon, and that made it so worthy of Brunelleschi's study, was the fact that the Pantheon's dome was constructed strictly of concrete with no outside support and no reinforcing structures. The ancient Romans didn't have like steel beams, so they used concrete exclusively. Brunelleschi studied the dome of the Pantheon carefully, learning about the way that it had been made strong and the way that the architects created a strong structure that was still flexible and lightweight. Part of the secret for that actually came from the inside of the dome of the Pantheon. What you're seeing here is the central piece of the dome. That hole in the middle is called an oculus. And what the architects of the Pantheon had done is they had tapered the dome from being almost 20 feet thick at its base to only being 3 or 4 feet thick at the top around that oculus. If you look at the sides, you're going to see square patterns. The areas between the squares are thick structures made of concrete that basically act as support structures. It's almost like a net created of concrete. In between those structures are areas that they call coffered pieces. Those areas are indented. They are much thinner than the surrounding support pieces, creating flexibility and lightness of weight. What Brunelleschi decided to do for the dome of the Florence Cathedral was incorporate a similar structure to this coffering from the structure of the Pantheon in Rome. What Brunelleschi actually decided to do, though, was instead of creating this indentation, Brunelleschi simply decided to build 2 domes, one inside the other, connected by a web support structure, much resembling this square support structure inside the Pantheon in Rome. Everyone initially thought that Brunelleschi, when he proposed 2 domes, one nested inside the other, was absolutely nuts. I've mentioned Giorgio Vasari before. He wrote a book called Lives of the Artists, detailing the lives and actions of many of the Renaissance's greatest artists. In this quote on your screen, he says the wardens, the people in charge of Florence, said his ideas were as mad as he was. And basically, what Brunelleschi responded was that the dome had to be pointed because he wanted to distribute the weight downward rather than outward, so they wouldn't have to worry about buttressing. It should be double with one dome inside the other, and he actually had already planned walkways running between the two domes. He said basically he knew what he was talking about, and everybody else just needed to butt out of his business. Before Brunelleschi could really even start building the dome, though, he had other problems to deal with. The dome, the part that Brunelleschi was hired to build, actually started about 140 feet above the ground, all right? So he's starting at 140 feet up and working up from there. He's got to figure out how to get guys, bricks, building tools, and equipment from the ground up 140 feet. Not only that, once he got all of them up there, then they expected to come back down for a lunch break and go back up to the top of the cathedral again. Now, the problem was that during Brunelleschi's time, the way that they got men and equipment up to the top of the cathedral to work on it was in a kind of a basket. Think a primitive elevator with a pulley system. And at the bottom of this little basket elevator was a big round wheel with cows attached to it. And the cows walked in a circle, and they pulled on the rope, and the pulley went up to the top. The problem was it was one way. If they wanted to get anything down, they had to unhitch all the cows, turn the cows around the other direction, rehitch all the cows, and then make the cows go around in a circle the other direction. This took forever. Brunelleschi was getting no work out of his guys on top of the cathedral because all of the time was being spent taking people up and down, hitching and unhitching cows. So Brunelleschi, being a genius, came up with his own explanation, his own solution to the problem. Brunelleschi designed a brand new pulley and lever system that was stronger and more efficient than the original. And then he invented something really simple but really brilliant. He invented a gear changing system. Basically, the cows were still walking in a circle, the buckets and baskets were still going up to the top of the cathedral and coming down from the top of the cathedral. But this time, when they wanted them to come down, instead of unhooking everything and rehooking it, all they had to do was change gears. Not only that, Brunelleschi put a new rule into place with the head foreman saying that the workmen had to eat their lunches on top of the cathedral instead of being able to come back down at lunchtime. Inside the structure, Brunelleschi's plans were coming together, and he was creating something completely impossible, something completely different from anything that anyone had ever seen. Brunelleschi commissioned millions of specially shaped bricks. Most of the bricks were wider at the front, narrower at the back, and they were laid in at an angle so that the outside of the dome was basically higher than the inside of the dome, allowing compression that made the dome stronger. Every so many horizontal bricks, Brunelleschi's plan called for a vertical brick, creating a pattern that we call a herringbone pattern, and creating a strength in the dome by mixing the physical forces between downward and outward. The dome is absolutely amazing. As it was constructed, part of what makes it so remarkable was that there was no support structure required for the dome. In other words, there was not a scaffolding holding it up while it was being built. The dome was completely freestanding. The workmen were actually standing on the bricks with nothing underneath them. But at one point, once they got high enough, those workmen were actually standing on bricks tilted at a 45-degree angle with no apparent support and nothing between them and the floor over 200 feet below them. There came a point actually in the construction of the dome where these guys refused. They wouldn't go up anymore because they were scared to stand on that 45-degree tilt and look straight down. And Cosimo de' Medici actually had to get up on the top of the dome and walk out on the structure with Brunelleschi to prove to them that it was safe. And of course, once Cosimo de' Medici did it, everyone else was willing to go back up and begin work again. Now, Brunelleschi actually had required that his workmen stay up on the top of the cathedral for lunch. But that declaration actually spawned another problem. This is Florence in the 1400s. When guys' wives pack them lunches, they don't get like a juice box, okay? The guys eating lunch on the top of the Florence Cathedral, over 200 feet above the floor, were drinking wine for lunch. A number of them actually fell to their deaths in the afternoon because they were slightly intoxicated and working on a 45-degree angle tilt brickwork without any support structure underneath you. Yeah, it didn't go well for them. Brunelleschi actually orders another structure built inside the dome. This structure is actually not intended to support the dome in any way. Instead, if you look at it, there are two large flat panels about 8 feet below the dome. Those are not intended to support the dome. Those are intended to catch the guys who fell off before they hit the floor. Yeah, they're still going to get hurt, but much less hurt than the others who fell directly down the 140 to 200 feet to crack their necks on the floor of the actual cathedral. After about 16 years of work, the dome was finally completed. Two domes, actually, one nested inside the other. And in the picture, you can actually see that square framework between the two domes, echoing the Pantheon in Rome and establishing the strength of the dome structure. The dome's full height is almost 300 feet without the cupola or tower on top. With the tower, it's 375 feet, 149 feet across, and it was built without any centering or internal support, by hand, in 16 years. We can't even fix a road in 16 years. And these people managed to build this massive, impressive dome atop the Florence Cathedral. That amazing dome created by Brunelleschi